Today, we just heard the Fed hiked rates up 0.75 of a point. That's their biggest single-day raise since 1994, I was reading. And so maybe talk to us a little bit about exactly what's going on and what it all means. I think it's a good way to start the podcast is just really get into how this works, like what's happening today with actual interest rates since the Fed did this and why, and kind of go through all that.
So I have to go back to like December and January when rates were below 3% in most places, right? And so as rates were really low, but the Fed started talking about inflation and having to curb it and having to deal with that issue that was on the horizon. And so when they came out, and one of those first meetings this year, this year was, we're going to have 7 rate hikes in the next 12 months. So if you do the math on the 7 rate hikes, they said we might even do a half the first time and then do 6 quarters the next to make the 7 rate hikes. The first one was a half, and then the next 6 would be quarters. That's 2% if you do the math. Well, our interest rates in January went from below 3 to below 5. So there's your 2%. Now they haven't made those moves yet, but they were just talking about it. So as you can see, that's how mortgage rates move. They are not directly tied to the Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate is a banking rate. Go ahead.
Well, no, so I was going to say, so they move based on the speculation, almost like a future would, or what?
Correct. It's basically a future. It's exactly what it is. Mortgage rates and mortgage-backed securities move based on what the Fed might do in the future. And so when you have good news and you have good things coming out, they react to those things. Same with bad news, right? Rates could move if a bad job report were to come next week. Rates could get better because people are going to see that maybe the economy is starting to struggle now. And that's when you start to see rates get better. When the economy is really good, other than the last couple of years because of COVID and some other things that happened, most of the time, if job reports were good, rates got better. If jobs reports were worse, rates got worse. And very similar on 3 or 4 different economic scales that they use.
So let's kind of start and just get into this. Why do they even have to raise rates? Why does the Fed do that?
So what they're doing is they're changing the cost of money. So basically, what the Fed funds rate changes is car loans, student loans, credit cards. And the reason it changes those 3 things is because the bank now pays the Fed for their money that they have to borrow. And the reason the bank borrows money is because they have to maintain a 10% liquidity from what they have lent out every single day. So every night a bank balances and they say, we've lent X amount of dollars. We need 10% of that to be in our cash liquid, or else they're not approved by the FDIC anymore. They lose their rating, all those things. So that Fed funds rate that you heard today raised by 3/4 is what the bank is now going to borrow the money they need from the Federal Reserve every night at that rate. So then the bank says, well, if we're borrowing money at that rate, we now have to have our margin to make money. So now all of a sudden the car loans are 0.75%. Your home equity line of credit on your house just went up 0.75% today. Everybody who has a home equity line of credit today.
Wait, the one that I already have on my home?
Correct.
They can just raise it like that?
It's because it's a home equity line of credit. It's an adjustable rate mortgage based on the Fed funds rate. So that's how the bank continues to make the same amount of margin on all the monies they have lent out is they have the adjustable rate feature in there. That's what a home equity line of credit is. So now you have that going up 0.75. Car loans will now be adjusted. Now, maybe not exactly, but they will. And then all the other banking options that you have out there are going to adjust, accordingly.
So why is it a big deal that this is happening? Maybe explain to people, because I think the problem and this was the problem when, COVID hit, and I blame the Republicans as much as the Democrats. They started dumping all this money in, $1.6 trillion here, and there's money going to all sorts of bullshit. 70 different countries were getting money for our stimulus bill. All this money's getting dumped in. People then start talking about student debt being forgiven. Let's dump another $1 trillion in. They're like talking about the Green New Deal, another $2 trillion here. Next thing you know, you can't dump all this money in and not have it affect anything, because ultimately the economy is really being ran on how much goods is being produced. Like what's actually getting produced, what's being done. And when you dump all this extra money and there's not extra goods being done, people just feel like they have wads of money, which is actually a problem, because then people stopped working. I mean, there's people that I know, we own some restaurants and stuff, and it got really hard. Like our biggest expense was was paying people extra to actually go to work because they were making just as much money not working as they were actually working. And so I saw this coming. We've been talking about this for 2 years on the podcast, like why it's a bad idea. You can't just dump. There's nothing is free. So when you say free college, well, no, it's paid for this way. And people don't understand how their money is being sent as a tax. They're just paying a lot more for everything now. I mean, with inflation, and to stop inflation, they raise rates. So now the cost of borrowing all that money is way through the roof. It's just a perpetuating problem. But I mean, to give an average loan, maybe you can help us. Like if a house is $500,000, if the rate's 3% versus now 6.25%, what does that do on a payment?
That's $700 more per month.
And so it goes
on the same exact amount. So $500,000 at 3% was $2,200 is now close to $3,000.
Yeah. And so it's just crazy. So I guess, so what do you expect to happen with all these rate hikes and everything going on? I mean, you own a giant mortgage company. Mm-hmm. You've closed thousands and thousands of loans. What do you see happening now because of this?
Well, I see kind of what we saw today. The Fed makes those moves, and they make a move that's abrupt now. And so it surprises and shocks the market, which is why we saw another 1% increase in interest rates, in mortgage interest rates from Friday, because the inflation number came out Friday, and instantly people start trying to see what the Fed's going to do Wednesday, right? The minute the talk comes that it's going to be off the path, it's going to be a greater move, biggest move in 30 years, all of a sudden mortgage rates jump. And that's basically the speculation. So that's what's going to happen. So if we continue to have high inflation, if raising interest rates and anything else that the federal government or somebody else or even the Federal Reserve does not curb inflation, rates will continue to rise because the Fed's going to have to continue making drastic steps. And so when they continue to make drastic steps, the investors, the mortgage-backed security, the guys that buy mortgage bonds, all those guys are going to want more money or going to pay more money for those bonds, right? They're going to want more interest for those bonds. And in return, rates go up. And that's what may continue to happen. Now, if job reports start to get a little bit, if we start to see economic news that can outweigh the inflation problem, which is going to take a lot, because inflation it's the biggest inflation problem we've had in our lifetimes and probably our parents' lifetimes, right? There's maybe a couple times in there in the last 60 years, but anyway, so that's the reason what's going to happen to rates, basically. And so,
well, I don't think people truly understand like how inflation is a tax on the poor. And so I wanted to explain that a little bit because, the person says, well, what is it, if it's going up for everybody? But the problem that it is if you're a saver, if you've spent your whole life being conservative and saving your money and stuff, let's say you got $200,000 in the bank that you've saved your whole life. Well, the buying power of that $200,000 used to be $200,000. Now, just in 1 year, it's $180,000. Like you lost $20,000 worth of purchasing power. And so it was nice and fun for everybody when it was housing, because if you owned a house, it was like, great, my house just went up 35% in the last year and a half. I'm stoked. But in reality, that was just another way that inflation was starting to manifest itself. It's been doing that with vehicles, it's been doing it with housing, it's been doing it with other things.
Yep.
And now it's all happening with food, gas, airplane tickets, and everything else.
Well, and that's when it starts affecting the regular person, right? Because now, not only
your life or my life might not change that much if eggs go up 35 cents a dozen, or even if travel goes up 30%, right? Let's say plane tickets I saw is up, I think 38%.
Right.
Okay, yeah, it's a little inconvenient or whatever, but like your average person, gas is up 108% in a year. That's a huge expense. I mean, I know in gas I spend about $600 a month. Well, if that goes up to $1,200 a month, think about if you're making $50,000 a year, $40,000 a year. It's a huge expense.
You don't have that money.
No,
you don't. And we had this analogy earlier where the person who is working hard to make ends meet is now going to struggle to make ends meet, and maybe the person that stays home now. Right? Because it's kind of like childcare. A lot of couples out there have a kid or two, and sometimes it's more feasible to let the mom stay home and watch the kids rather than go get a job and work, just because of the expenses that come from childcare, gas, all those other things. So I think we have a whole mess of problems that we're just recirculating, right? And it's just going to keep going. Yeah, go ahead.
So how does this affect the housing market? What's your opinion? I mean, I'm seeing right now, like we've gone from 1,800 homes on the market in Utah to 6,300 in about a month and a half. That is a giant inventory issue. And that's just starting. I mean, that's in a month and a half. I mean, we could get back, I remember when back in the day, we had about 12,000 homes on average on the market. And for the last few years, it's just been insane. There's been no homes, inventory's been below 2,000 homes, but we're seeing now it's creeping up a couple hundred homes every single day.
Right. Well, and you have the same problem with the gas prices getting right. Some people that were wanting to buy a house at 500,000 or 600,000 at 3% could afford it. Now those people can't. I mean, it's not only that, they just can't even buy a house now. Right. So now they've already gone and made other plans to rent or live with someone or whatever the case may be, save more money, whatever it is. And maybe we even wait for the next cycle or maybe not even buy at all. Right? Because that's now going to enter, I mean, with the higher prices, all that. So, I mean, honestly, it's just not affordable for a lot of people now. So is there some panic selling in the market right now? Yes. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have listed their house quickly. There's a lot of people that have built a home that are got delayed.
You're building a house
I'm building
now,
the
right?
home.
So how much is your house delayed?
Oh, I'm a year and a half past when it was supposed to be done.
And so your rate would have been 3%.
Oh, absolutely.
Now it's going to be 7%.
Yeah.
Most likely.
Right. And now I'm going, do I sell it? Or do I even want that interest rate? I'm a mortgage guy. I started at 9-10%, right? Like 99, 2000. First loan I ever closed was 8.5%.
Really?
Right. And that was a good deal, right? But we see that 2 and 3, and that's also the mentality behind it. Is now you're gonna have people that said, "Well, I could have got 3. I'm never buying a house until I can get 3% again." I've seen it now, right? Like they've opened the heavens up.
I remember when I got in, everything was 6.5, 6 3/4. I remember the first time I saw someone with a 4% rate, and I was so jealous. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And then it's funny because I didn't end up buying my dream home, and I'm looking back now. It's only been 6 months since rates were at 2 3/4, and I'm like, why didn't I take advantage of that? But ultimately I just wasn't ready to move. But it is kind of funny. I'm looking at it now and I'm like, well, I'm not going anywhere. The house I'm on, I think my rate is like 2.25.
Yeah. On like a 15-year.
Yeah, on a 15-year rate.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going anywhere.
No.
I mean,
no.
So anyway, I don't know.
No, why would you? No, and same with the investment property now. I mean, when I first got in the business, you would get an investment property, and if you were eating $100 or $200 a month, not even cash flow, that wasn't even a conversation we had back then. It was, I own a rental property, it's going to appreciate, and I'm going to pay $100 or $200 a month just to have that asset. And now, I mean, I had guys buying houses last year, $300, $400, $500, $700 cash flow a month.
Yeah.
So I just don't know. I think it's a mentality switch again, right? We have to kind of think of it as a different way. Real estate has always been a good bet, even if it costs you $100 a month. And that's what it is now. I mean, rents are rising still. And I think that's the other problem now we have is rents are going to continue to go up regardless of what interest rates and real estate.
Why do rents continue to go up if the market slows down?
Well, I think because the cost of living is going up. I think because interest rates being higher, landlords may want to ask more money to continue to cash flow. And availability is still down. Overall housing in Utah, and I'll speak only about Utah because I live here.
Right.
Overall housing in Utah, there isn't enough. We're going to go back to that 08, 09, 2010, where half the people you talk to lived in the basement of somebody else's house or their parents' house in Utah. I mean, that was the only way back then to even try and afford, right? Now, I think our income levels are getting better here, obviously. Our economy is still growing. I saw a report the other day, our GDP is still going up in Utah. So you have all these great things still, but it's attracting the outside. It's not helping the ones necessarily in the gas price situation and all those things.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough to see what happens.
It'll be interesting, man. It's, being in real estate, obviously, as long as I have, I've seen the different cycles. And it was kind of interesting. We knew the rates would be the thing that slowed down the housing market. But I don't know why they didn't do it earlier. Like everybody was forever, houses were going through the roof. It's like they could have, if they would have hiked rates to 5% a year and a half ago when things were going nuts, it would have been perfect. Because everything would have chilled itself out. It still would have been a 7 or 8% growth. I mean, honestly, the people in charge have no business sense at all right now, and it's frustrating because it's so easy to see from the outside.
Right, and there's a lot of contributing factors, but I agree. I've said that. I said it went a year too long. I've said that to every person I know, and I benefited. Right, like you and I benefited a lot more than a lot of people did. Right, and we're sitting on houses, and our rentals are going up, and everything, and we went crazy. But I still think it went a year too long. I would have been okay to go, hey, let's slow her down. Let's just make sure everything's, kosher, you know what I mean? And let things kind of level out then when we didn't have all the other problems.
Yeah. No,
now it's compounding.
No, I agree.